Have you ever been sick, really sick, and the one person you called made you feel more alone than before you dialed? That was me. 4 months ago. Houston Methodist Hospital. A diagnosis I hadn't said out loud to anyone yet. So I called my mother. She answered. I told her. 4 seconds of silence. Then, "Baby, I gotta go. Brittany on the other line. You gon' be fine. You a nurse." Click. I didn't cry. I think I was past crying when it came to Carolyn Caldwell. What I felt was colder than sadness, something that had been building for 31 years and had finally quietly finished building. I didn't call her back, not for 3 weeks. Then I mentioned 2 things to my uncle Vernon Big Mama's land and the word will in the same sentence. 20 minutes later, Mama's name lit up my screen. Her voice came through warm and slow. "Baby, I've been thinking about you. I heard you mention something about Big Mama's land. I just wanted to make sure as a family we handle things the right way." 3 weeks ago, she couldn't stay on the line long enough to hear me finish a sentence. Now she had time. That's when I understood everything. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to where it all started. To understand what happened with that phone call, you have to understand the Caldwells. We are a 3rd Ward family. Houston born, Houston raised. The kind of family that has the same last name on 3 different houses within 4 blocks of each other. The kind that fills an entire pew at Second Baptist every Sunday and greets the pastor by his first name. The kind where everybody knows everybody's business, everybody has an opinion, and nobody talks about the hard things out loud. We didn't talk about money, we didn't talk about favoritism, and we absolutely did not talk about color. But it was there. Lord knows it was there. My mother, Carolyn Caldwell, is a light-skinned woman. Grew up being told she was pretty in a specific way, the way that gets rewarded in certain black families, in certain churches, in certain rooms. She knew what that currency was worth, and she spent it carefully. My father left when I was 4, and Brittany was 6. After that, it was just the 3 of us in the house on Ennis Street, Mama Brittany and me. Same roof, same kitchen, 2 completely different childhoods. Brittany took after Mama. Same complexion, same easy smile, same way of walking into a room that made people look twice. Growing up, the comments came constantly at church, at family gatherings, at the beauty supply store on Alameda. "Brittany, you are just gorgeous, baby. You got that good hair." "Carolyn, she is going to break some hearts." "Lord, she looks just like you." I stood right there when they said it. Every single time. And every single time the eyes would flick to me just for a second and then away, like I was a footnote, like acknowledging me too enthusiastically might take something away from Brittany. I am darker. I have my grandmother's complexion, her wide nose, her deep-set eyes, features that in our family were described with words like strong or interesting, never beautiful, never first. I learned early what those words meant. I learned early what I was. Mama never said it directly. That's the thing about colorism inside a family, it doesn't announce itself. It lives in the small things. The way she braided Brittany's hair on Sunday mornings with care, humming to herself, while mine got pulled back fast with whatever elastic was nearby. The way she introduced us to new people at church. "This is my Brittany." Full stop, full smile, then a half-second pause before "and Jasmine." The way Brittany's school pictures went on the mantle in matching frames and mine ended up in a drawer somewhere on Ennis Street. I found one of those photos once when I was maybe 9 years old. It was my 2nd grade picture. I was wearing a yellow dress I loved. I was smiling so hard. It was tucked behind a stack of old utility bills in the kitchen drawer like it had been filed away. I put it back. I closed the drawer. I never said anything. That was the year I learned to take up less space. Brittany wasn't cruel, not intentionally. She was just a child who had been handed something, attention preference, the warm center of a family's approval, and accepted it the way children accept whatever they're given. She didn't question it. Why would she? It was just the way things were. We were sisters who shared a bedroom and a last name and almost nothing else. The first time I felt truly seen was at Big Mama's house in Conroe, Loretta Mae Caldwell. 81 years old, thick-ankled, slow-moving, with hands that had shelled more butter beans than I could count, and a voice that carried across 47 acres without effort. She lived in the farmhouse her father had built after buying that land in 1967. Every summer, the whole Caldwell family made the drive up from Houston for the reunion. Cousins, aunts, uncles, church friends who had become family over decades. Folding tables in the yard, somebody's playlist fighting with the sound of cicadas, the smell of brisket and sweet potato pie coming through every window. At those reunions, Brittany was the star. She'd float from group to group, accepting compliments the way she always did, graciously, effortlessly, like it was simply her natural environment. Mama stayed close to her hand on her shoulder, laughing at the right moments. I usually found a corner. I helped Big Mama in the kitchen. I learned how to make her cornbread from scratch. No box, no shortcuts. And she talked to me the whole time like I was somebody worth talking to. One summer, I was around 12. Big Mama set down her wooden spoon, turned to look at me, and said something I had never heard inside my own family. "Baby girl, you are the one." I didn't know what to do with that. I laughed a little. I thought she was talking about the cornbread. She wasn't. She put one hand on the side of my face. Her palm was warm and rough and steady, and she said it again, slower. "You are the one." Then she picked up her spoon and went back to stirring like she hadn't just said the most important thing anyone had ever said to me. I thought about those words for years. I turned them over in my mind on bad days, the days Mama forgot to come to something, the days Brittany got the bigger piece, without anyone noticing, the days I sat in my own house feeling like a guest. You are the one. I didn't fully understand it, but I held on to it the way you hold on to something when you don't have much else to hold. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for another 15 years, was that Big Mama hadn't just said those words. She had built something around them. I got into Prairie View A&M on a partial scholarship. Nobody in my immediate family had finished a 4-year degree. Mama had done 2 years at Houston Community College before life got in the way. That was how she described it. Life got in the way, and Brittany had tried a semester at Texas Southern before deciding college wasn't for her. So when I got that acceptance letter, I thought, this is it. This is the moment. I was wrong about what moment it would be. Mama's reaction was short. Prairie View. Okay. She nodded, once the way you nod when someone tells you the weather. Then she turned back to the stove. That was it. No hug, no call to Grandma, no announcement at Second Baptist the following Sunday. Nothing. I told myself it was fine. I told myself she was tired from work. I told myself a lot of things that year that I almost believed. I worked 2 jobs during undergrad early morning shifts at a diner off Highway 6 and weekend work at a nursing home in Prairie View, where I learned more about real patient care than any classroom ever taught me. I took out loans for what the scholarship didn't cover. I called Big Mama every Sunday. I did not call Mama much because the calls felt like reporting to someone who wasn't really listening. 4 years later, I walked across that stage at PVAMU with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing and a grade point average of 3.8. Honors. The first in my immediate family to finish a 4-year degree. Mama came to the ceremony. So did Brittany and Uncle Vernon and Aunt Brenda and a few cousins. They drove up together in Vernon's Suburban. I spotted them in the stands from the floor, Mama in a yellow dress, Brittany in white already on her phone. After the ceremony, we took photos in the parking lot. I stood in my cap and gown diploma in hand, squinting into the afternoon sun. Mama stood next to me for 2 photos. In both of them, she was half turned toward Brittany, laughing at something Brittany had said just before the shutter clicked. There is a photo from that day where I am standing alone, cap slightly crooked, diploma pressed to my chest, smiling anyway. Shanice, we had just met that semester. We were not even close yet. She was the one who took it. She had noticed I had nobody standing with me. That photo lives on my phone. I look at it sometimes. I look at the smile on that girl's face and I think about how hard she worked to get to that parking lot, how little it cost anyone else to just stand next to her. Dinner after the ceremony was at a Tex-Mex place off Interstate 10 that Uncle Vernon chose because he was craving fajitas. We sat around a big round table, 8 of us. For the first 45 minutes, the conversation was about Brittany, specifically about a man named Marcus Moore. Brittany had met Marcus 3 months earlier at a friend's cookout in Houston. He was from Atlanta, worked in real estate development, drove a white Range Rover. Mama had already decided he was the one. She talked about him the way she talked about nobody else in our family, with full attention, both hands on the table leaning forward. He is just so well-spoken, so established. Baby, he asked about meeting me formally. Can you imagine? I sat across the table with my graduation sash still around my neck and watched my mother glow talking about a man she had met twice. Nobody asked about my plans. Nobody asked what it felt like to finish. Nobody mentioned 3.8 or honors or the loans I had spent 4 years paying down. At one point, Aunt Brenda looked at me and said, "You must be tired, baby." That was the most direct acknowledgement I received that afternoon. I drove home alone that night, 2.5 hours back to Houston. I stopped at a Whataburger somewhere around Katy and sat in the parking lot and ate a burger by myself in my graduation gown because I hadn't wanted to take it off yet. I wasn't ready to stop being the girl who had just done something. I ate that burger. I folded the gown carefully. I drove the rest of the way home. I told myself it was fine. 2 years later, Brittany and Marcus got engaged. Mama moved like the wedding was her own project venue, research dress appointments, color palette discussions at the kitchen table on Ennis Street. She called me once a week during that period, which was more than she had called me during all 4 years at Prairie View. Every call was about the wedding. When the final budget came together, Mama sat me down and told me she was contributing $5,000 toward the reception costs. $5,000 was not money Mama had sitting around. She worked dispatch at a logistics company off the Southwest Freeway. She made decent money, but she was not a woman with savings to spare. I knew what $5,000 cost her, and I said nothing about it because it was not my business what she chose to do with her own money. What I held on to quietly, what I filed away in that part of myself that had been filing things away since 2nd grade, was that when I had needed help with a $400 car repair during my 2nd year at PVAMU, I had called Mama and she had said, "Baby, I just don't have it right now." And I had figured it out myself. I always figured it out myself. At the engagement party held at a hall in Pearland with 60 guests and a catered spread, and a DJ who played nothing but early 2000s R&B, Mama gave a toast. She stood at the front of the room with a glass of champagne and talked for nearly 4 minutes about Brittany, about her beauty, her spirit, her ability to attract good things into her life. I was seated at table 7, near the back, next to one of Marcus's cousins I had never met. I clapped with everyone else. I smiled when people looked over. I ate my food and I drove home, and I did not cry until I was in my own apartment with the door locked, and even then it was quiet, controlled. The kind of crying that has had a lot of practice being small. But the moment that stayed with me, the one I came back to when I needed to remind myself that I was not imagining things happened 3 months after the wedding. I was working nights at Houston Methodist by then, rotating shifts, running myself thin. My neighbor, Miss Patricia, had been watching Amara in the evenings, but she was going out of town for a week to visit her sister in Dallas. I needed someone to watch my daughter for 4 nights. Just evenings. Just until midnight. I called Mama. She picked up on the 2nd ring, which gave me hope. I explained the situation. 4 nights. Amara was 2 years old by then, easy, quiet, good with her grandma. I just needed someone I trusted. Mama was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Baby, I got Bible study Tuesday and Thursday, and Wednesday I promised Sister Holloway I'd help with the decorations for the anniversary banquet." "What about Monday?" I asked. Another pause. "I'm just tired on Mondays, Jasmine. You know how Mondays are." I knew how Mondays were. I also knew what it felt like to stand in a parking lot in a graduation gown with nobody next to you. I knew what table 7 felt like. I was starting to build quite a collection of these feelings, all filed away neatly, all unlabeled, taking up space I didn't know I had. I called Shanice. She took all 4 nights without me finishing the sentence. That was the year I stopped being surprised. I didn't stop hurting, but I stopped being surprised. And somewhere in Conroe, in a farmhouse on 47 acres, Big Mama was watching. She had always been watching, and she was already writing things down. The summer Amara turned 3, I paid off my student loans. $52,000, 6 years of payments, 2 jobs through most of undergrad, every tax refund, every overtime shift I could pick up at Houston Methodist, gone. Finished. I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in July with a confirmation email on my laptop screen, and I cried the good kind, the kind that comes from the bottom of your chest for about 10 minutes. Then I made coffee. Then I got ready for work. I didn't tell Mama right away. There was a part of me that wanted to. There was still that old reflex, the one that believed if I just showed her something real, something undeniable, she would finally look at me the way she looked at Brittany. But I had learned by then that achievements didn't move Carolyn Caldwell unless they were connected to someone she had already decided to be proud of. So I kept it to myself. I told Shanice. I told Big Mama on our Sunday call. Big Mama said, "Baby girl, your grandmother is proud of you down to her bones." I held that for a long time. 2 weeks later, the whole family drove up to Conroe for the annual reunion. That year was bigger than usual. Somebody had rented extra folding tables. There was a bounce house for the kids. Uncle Vernon had built a new fire pit the previous fall and was very proud of it. The weather was the kind of hot that wraps around you before you even get out of the car, Houston-adjacent heat, wet and immediate. I arrived with Amara on my hip and a pan of Big Mama's cornbread I had made from scratch the night before. I had the recipe memorized by then. I knew exactly how much buttermilk exactly, how long in the cast iron, exactly when to pull it before the edges went too dark. Big Mama had given me that recipe like she gave me most things quietly, directly, like it was simply mine and always had been. Brittany and Marcus arrived 45 minutes after us, which was perfect timing because it meant the food was out and the crowd was warm and everyone was ready to receive them. Marcus drove a new white Range Rover, the second one in 3 years. Brittany stepped out in a linen sundress the color of cream oversized sunglasses, natural hair pulled back with a silk scarf. She looked the way she always looked, effortless, luminous, worthy of a second glance. The reaction from the family was immediate. Hugs, exclamations, "Look at you, girl, Brittany, you are glowing." Mama materialized from somewhere near the potato salad and pulled Brittany into a long embrace. Both hands on her face afterward, studying her like a painting she owned. I watched from the yard with Amara balanced on my hip. Then Carolyn made the announcement. She stepped onto the back porch just high enough to be seen over the crowd and tapped a plastic cup with a fork until people settled. "I just want to take a moment," she said, voice full and proud, "to celebrate my daughter Brittany and her husband Marcus. Y'all know Marcus just closed on a commercial property in Buckhead last month." She paused for effect. My daughter is out there building something, and I could not be more proud. Applause, real warm, sustained applause. Someone let out a 2-fingered whistle. Marcus nodded with a modest smile. Brittany pressed her hand to her chest. I stood in the yard. $52,000 paid off. 6 years. Not one word. I knew better than to expect an announcement. I had stopped expecting things years ago, but knowing better doesn't mean it doesn't land. It always lands just quieter, just deeper. What happened next was the part I could not file away. Amara wriggled down from my hip and ran across the grass toward Carolyn, who had stepped down from the porch and was standing near the food tables. My daughter was 3 years old. She had her father's dimples and my grandmother's complexion and the kind of laugh that made strangers turn around in grocery stores. She ran the way 3-year-olds run full commitment arms, slightly out no concept of caution. "Grandma," she called. Carolyn looked down, and she stepped back, not dramatically, not cruelly, just back. A small physical withdrawal, the kind a person makes when something is coming toward them that they're not sure they want to receive. She let Amara reach her arms up and then bent down briefly, a quick pat on the shoulder, before straightening and turning back to Brittany's youngest cousin's baby, a lighter-skinned child, maybe 18 months old, who she then reached for and lifted up, settling him on her hip with a naturalness that looked like muscle memory. Amara stood there for a second with her arms still slightly raised. Then she turned around and looked at me. Her eyes were not hurt yet. She was too young for hurt. She just looked confused, like she had reached for something she thought was there and found air instead. I walked to her. I picked her up. I held her against my chest, and I looked at my mother over my daughter's shoulder, and I felt something I had no name for. Something that was not sadness and not anger, but some specific combination of the two that lives in the body like heat. I did not say anything. I took Amara to find Big Mama. We found her in the kitchen, moving slowly between the counter and the stove, narrating to herself the way she always did when she cooked. She heard us come in and turned around, and when she saw Amara, her whole face changed. Not performed warmth, not social warmth, but the real kind. The kind that starts in the eyes. There she is. She opened her arms wide. Come here, Miss Amara. Come give Big Mama some sugar. Amara went to her immediately. No hesitation. Children know. I sat down at the old wooden table, the same table where Big Mama had first told me I was the one, and I watched my daughter get held the way I had always wanted to be held in this family. Properly. Completely. Like she was the whole point. Big Mama caught my eye over Amara's shoulder. She held my gaze for a moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. After Amara fell asleep on the couch an hour later, Big Mama called me back into the kitchen. She moved to the counter and reached up into the cabinet above the refrigerator, the high one, the one nobody else ever opened, and brought down a small tin box. Dark green, slightly dented at one corner, the kind that might have once held Christmas cookies or sewing supplies. She set it on the table in front of me. I need you to hold on to this, she said. I looked at it. What's in it? Something that belongs to you. She settled into her chair across from me. Don't open it yet, you'll know when. Big Mama, chilly. Her voice was gentle but final, the way it always was when a conversation was over. I have been watching this family for 81 years. I know what I know. And I know who this land needs to go to when I'm gone. She folded her hands on the table. It ain't about what's pretty. It ain't about what's easy to love. It's about who has the roots to hold something. She looked at me steadily. That's you, Jasmine. It has always been you. I took the tin box home that evening, wrapped in a dish towel, and placed it under my bed. I didn't open it. I didn't tell anyone about it. I lay in the dark that night, listening to Amara breathe in the next room, and I thought about roots, about what it means to hold something. I thought about my daughter's arms reaching up and finding nothing. I thought about the way Big Mama's kitchen always smelled like cornbread and certainty. I thought about how some people spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen by the people who were supposed to choose them first. That night, I made a quiet decision. Not dramatic, not angry. Just clear. I was done waiting to be chosen. I was going to choose myself. I just didn't know yet that Big Mama had already chosen me first and had been building something around that choice for years. The week before my diagnosis, Carolyn called me 3 times, not to check in, not to ask about Amara. The first call was about her car insurance. She wanted me to look up whether switching providers would save her money, and could I just pull up the numbers real quick. The second call was about a water bill that looked higher than usual, and she thought maybe there was a leak, and did I know a plumber. The third call was on a Thursday evening while I was finishing a 12-hour shift still in scrubs, eating a granola bar in the break room, because I had not had a real meal since 6 in the morning. That call was about Brittany. Marcus and Brittany were having what Mama described as a rough patch. She didn't give details, or maybe she gave all of them, I don't remember. But the call lasted 22 minutes, and somewhere around minute 15, I realized I was no longer a person on the other end of the line. I was a surface, something to talk at while she processed her worry about her favorite daughter's marriage. I said, at the right moments. I said, "That sounds hard, Mama." I finished my granola bar. I threw away the wrapper. "You know, Brittany just needs support right now," Mama said near the end. "She needs her family around her." "I know," I said. "I might fly out to Atlanta next month just to be there for her." "That sounds like a good idea." "You think you could help with the ticket?" "Just part of it. Things are tight right now." I told her I would see what I could do. We hung up. I sat in the break room for another 3 minutes staring at the wall before I got up and went back to my patients. That was Thursday. The following Tuesday, I found the lump. I want to be careful about how I say this because I know what it means and I want to say it right. I found it during a routine self-check. I was standing in my bathroom at 6:45 in the morning, Amara still asleep Houston, just starting to lighten outside the window. It was small, the kind of thing you could convince yourself wasn't there if you wanted to. I am a nurse. I know bodies. I know what probably nothing feels like, and I know what Make the Call Today feels like. This was Make the Call Today. I scheduled the appointment for Friday. I did not tell anyone. I went to work Wednesday and Thursday like normal, took Amara to daycare, picked her up, made dinner, gave her a bath, read her a book about a bear who loses his hat and finds it again. I tucked her in. I sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a little longer than usual, listening to her breathe. On Friday morning, I dropped Amara off and drove to the imaging center on Fannin Street. I checked in under my own name. I sat in a waiting room with soft lighting and a television playing a cooking show with the sound off. I filled out paperwork. I handed over my insurance card. I did everything alone. I had become very good at doing things alone. The radiologist was a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Okonkwo. She reviewed the imaging with me directly, which I appreciated. She used clear language. She said the word suspicious. She referred me to an oncologist. She said we would know more after the biopsy, but that I should not wait. I drove home on the Southwest Freeway in Friday afternoon traffic. The radio was on, but I could not tell you what was playing. I remember a truck with landscaping equipment in front of me. I remember the way the Houston skyline looked off to my left, glassy and indifferent. I remember thinking in a very practical, almost detached way about Amara's daycare pickup time and whether I needed to text Miss Patricia. I did not think about calling Mama. Not yet. The biopsy was the following Monday. Dr. Okonkwo's colleague, a breast specialist named Dr. Farhan, performed it at the Methodist campus. Shanice knew I had an appointment. I had told her I had a medical thing, kept it vague, and she texted me that morning. "I'm here if you need me. Doesn't matter what time." I read that text in the waiting room and had to breathe through my nose for a moment to keep it together. Dr. Farhan called me Wednesday afternoon with the results. I was on my lunch break sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage eating a sandwich I had packed that morning because the cafeteria line was always too long. I answered on the second ring. He said the word malignant. He said stage 2. He said treatable and good prognosis, and we caught it at a reasonable point, and I wrote all of it down on the back of a receipt I found in my center console because I knew my brain was not going to retain it correctly. I sat in that parking garage for 11 minutes after we hung up. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard. I needed to go back inside. I had patients. I had a job. I had a 4-year-old who needed to be picked up at 5:30. I called Shanice first. She answered on the first ring. I said 3 words. It came back positive. And she said, "I'm coming to your car right now." And she did. She sat with me for 20 minutes in that parking garage, not saying much, just there. Present, the way some people know how to be. That evening, after Amara was asleep, I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, and I thought about calling Mama. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me, the part that had been reaching for her since I was a little girl in a yellow dress, still believed that this might be different, that a diagnosis would cut through everything, that blood would finally mean something, that she would say, "I'm on my way, baby," and mean it. I prepared myself. I wrote down what I wanted to say, not a script, just the shape of it, the facts, the treatment plan Dr. Farhan had outlined. I wanted to be clear. I didn't want to fall apart. I was a nurse. I knew how to present information. I practiced saying the word out loud alone in my living room. Malignant. It didn't get easier with repetition. The next morning, I called her. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear the television in the background, one of those morning talk shows she always had on. She sounded distracted, but not unfriendly. "Hey, baby, what's going on?" I took a breath. I told her about the appointment. I told her about the biopsy. I told her what Dr. Farhan had said on Wednesday, the word, the stage, the treatment plan. I spoke slowly. I had prepared for this. I kept my voice steady. When I finished, there was silence. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. I waited, and then she said it. "Baby, I gotta go. Brittany on the other line. You gonna be fine. You a nurse." The call ended. 2 minutes and 17 seconds. I watched the timer disappear from my screen. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. Outside, Houston was doing what it always does in September, hot gray at the edges, indifferent. Amara was in the next room watching cartoons. I could hear the theme song, something bright and repetitive. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of morning that has no idea what just happened in the kitchen. I sat very still for a long time. I had prepared for a lot of responses. I had prepared for discomfort, for deflection, for the particular way Carolyn Caldwell changed the subject when things got emotionally expensive. I had not prepared for 2 minutes and 17 seconds. I had not prepared to be replaced mid-sentence by the other line. I didn't cry. I was past that. What I felt was quieter than crying and heavier. It settled into my chest and stayed there solid and permanent, like something that had finally stopped pretending to be temporary. That night, I did not call her back. I told myself I just needed a day. 1 day became 3. 3 became a week. A week became 3 weeks. And somewhere in those 3 weeks, something inside me finished shifting. Something that had been moving slowly, incrementally over 31 years of parking lots and table 7s and phone calls that went nowhere finally stopped. It had arrived somewhere. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. 3 weeks after that phone call, I started my first round of treatment. I am not going to spend a lot of time describing what treatment feels like because anyone who has been through it or loved someone who is already knows. And anyone who hasn't no description does it justice anyway. What I will say is this: it is exhausting in a way that goes deeper than tired. It reaches into parts of you that sleep cannot fix. You go to your appointments. You follow the protocol. You come home and you lie down and you stare at the ceiling and you remind yourself that this is the thing that is going to keep you here for Amara. That is the thought you hold on to. That is the only thought that matters. Shanice drove me to my first 2 infusion sessions. She sat in the chair next to me and brought snacks I couldn't always eat and talked about everything and nothing patients. Houston traffic, a new restaurant she wanted to try on, Westheimer, and she never once looked at me with that particular expression. People get around illness, the one that is half pity and half relief that it isn't them. She just looked at me like I was Jasmine. Like nothing had changed. That was the greatest gift anyone gave me during those months. I had not spoken to Carolyn since the call. She had not reached out either. Not a text, not a voicemail, not a card in the mail, nothing. 23 days of complete silence from the woman who had called me 3 times in 1 week to ask about car insurance and water bills. I had stopped being surprised, but I want to be honest, I had not stopped feeling it. There's a difference between knowing something and being done hurting from it. I knew my mother. I had known her for 31 years. Knowing her did not make the silence smaller. The conversation that changed everything happened by accident. It was a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks into treatment. I was home resting between shifts. I had reduced my hours temporarily, Dr. Farhan's recommendation, and Houston Methodist had been accommodating in a way I was genuinely grateful for. Amara was at daycare. The apartment was quiet. My Uncle Vernon called. Not about anything specific. Vernon called the way old-school family members call just to check in, to hear a voice, to feel connected. He asked how I was doing. I gave him the honest version, which I had stopped being careful about. I was sick. I was in treatment. I was managing. Lord have mercy. He said, Jasmine, you should have told the family. I told Mama, I said. There was a pause on his end. She had to take Brittany's call. Vernon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Baby, I'm sorry. And he meant it. Vernon was not a complicated man. He had spent most of his life following Carolyn's lead because it was easier, but he was not without a heart. We talked for a few more minutes, and then I don't even remember how it came up. It was just part of the natural drift of conversation. I mentioned Big Mama. I said something about the Sunday calls I missed now that she was gone, about how I still reached for the phone some Sunday mornings out of habit. And then I said something about the farmhouse in Conroe, about hoping the property taxes were being kept up, about whether anyone in the family had talked about what would happen with the land eventually. I said the word will once, casually, in passing. I didn't think anything of it. I got off the phone with Vernon and went to make tea. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Mama. I stood in my kitchen with the kettle in my hand, and I looked at that name for a long moment. My heart did something complicated, not hope exactly, not anymore, but the ghost of hope. The memory of what hope used to feel like when I was still young enough to believe the next call would be different. I set the kettle down. I answered, Baby. Her voice came through warm and unhurried like Sunday morning, like peach cobbler cooling on a counter. How you doing? I've been thinking about you so much. I said nothing. I waited. I heard you mention something about Big Mama's land. A small pause, practiced, not natural. I just wanted to make sure you know as a family we handle things the right way. 17 seconds of silence. I counted them. Not deliberately. My brain just counted the way a nurse's brain catalogs things, automatically. Heart rate, breath, sounds the exact number of seconds before someone answers a question they don't want to answer. 17 seconds. During those 17 seconds, I thought about the parking lot at PVAMU. I thought about Table 7 at the engagement party. I thought about Amara's arms reaching upward and finding air. I thought about 2 minutes and 17 seconds. I thought about You Can Be Fine, You a Nurse, and the sound of a call ending before I had finished a sentence. I thought about all of it in 17 seconds, and then something cracked open inside me. Not from anger, not from sadness, from clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives the way light arrives in a room when someone finally opens a window. Quiet, immediate, obvious once it's there. I understood exactly what this phone call was. She had not called because she was worried about me. She had not called because 23 days of silence had finally become too heavy to carry. She had called because Vernon had passed along the word will, and something in Carolyn Caldwell had calculated the odds and picked up the phone. That was it. That was the whole thing. 31 years reduced to a single clean calculation. I heard her breathing on the other end, waiting for me to fill the silence, to say, "Oh, Mama, I'm so glad you called," to be the daughter she could count on to smooth things over, to make it easy, to never make her stand in the discomfort of what she had done. I spoke slowly, carefully, the way I speak to patients when I need them to hear every word. "Mama," I said, "you hung up on me." A beat. "Baby, I had just told you I was sick." My voice did not shake. I was proud of that. I used the word. "I told you exactly what the doctor said, and you hung up because Brittany was on the other line." "Now, Jasmine, that's not fair." "I'm not calling it fair or unfair," I said. "I'm just telling you what happened. You hung up, and you didn't call back for 23 days. I didn't know it was that serious. I told you it was serious. I told you exactly how serious it was." I stopped. I let that land. "You chose not to stay on the line long enough to hear the rest." Silence from her end, the morning talk show still murmuring in the background. That same indifferent television that had been playing during every phone call for 31 years. She started to say something about how hard things had been about Brittany's situation, about how she had been stretched thin. I listened. I let her talk. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said 3 sentences. "Mama, I love you, but I can't do this right now. I need to focus on getting better." And I ended the call. I set the phone on the counter. I picked up the kettle. I poured my tea. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I had expected to feel something enormous grief or release, or the specific exhaustion that comes after a long overdue conversation. Instead, I felt something much smaller and much more solid. Something like ground. Like I had been standing on uncertain terrain for 31 years and had just taken one step onto something firm. I drank my tea by the kitchen window. Outside, the Houston afternoon was doing what September afternoons do: thick air, pale sky, the neighborhood going about its business. I thought about the tin box under my bed. That night, after Amara was asleep, I walked into my bedroom, crouched down, and pulled it out. I set it on the mattress in front of me. I looked at it for a moment, dark green, slightly dented at one corner, the faint smell of cedar when I held it close. "Don't open this yet. When you need it, you'll know." I needed it. I opened it. Inside the tin box were 2 things: a letter and a business card. The letter was handwritten on 3 sheets of yellow legal paper, folded into thirds my name, written on the outside, in Big Mama's careful, deliberate cursive, the handwriting of a woman who had learned to write in a time when penmanship still meant something. The business card was cream-colored, heavy stock, simple. Marcus L. Freeman, estate attorney, Conroe, Texas, a phone number, nothing else. I unfolded the letter slowly. I read it once. Then I set it down on the mattress and sat very still for a moment. Then I picked it up and read it again. Big Mama had written it on March 9th, 2022. I knew that date because she had written it at the top of the first page the way she dated everything: careful, deliberate, permanent. That was 2.5 years before she passed. 2.5 years before any of us knew she was running out of time. She had known what she was doing. She had sat down at that old wooden table in Conroe, and she had written this letter with full intention, full clarity, and full love. She wrote about the land first. 47 acres in Montgomery County, purchased by her father, Jasper Caldwell, in 1967, with money he had saved over 11 years working double shifts at a paper mill in Huntsville. She described what that purchase had cost him, not just money, but the particular effort of a black man in 1967, Texas, trying to own something permanent in a system designed to prevent exactly that. She wanted me to know the weight of what those acres represented. Not property, history, proof. The kind of proof that takes generations to build and one bad decision to lose. Then she wrote about me. She wrote that she had watched me since I was small, that she had seen what happened in our family, not just the favoritism, but the specific particular cruelty of colorism dressed up as love. She used that word directly, colorism. She did not soften it or dance around it the way our family always had. She named it plainly the way you name something when you are 81 years old and done pretending. She wrote Jasmine, "I watched your mother look past you your whole life. I watched her choose the easier love, the one that required nothing of her, the one that reflected back what she already believed about beauty and worth. I want you to know that I saw it. I saw you every time you helped me in that kitchen, every Sunday call, every reunion where you found your way to the corner and made yourself small so nobody would feel uncomfortable by your presence. I saw all of it. And I need you to know what your mother could not give you was never about you. It was always about what she could not face in herself. I had to stop reading at that point. I set the letter down again. I pressed both hands flat on the mattress and I breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the same instruction I give patients when something is too large to hold all at once. I breathed until the tightness in my chest loosened enough to continue. She wrote about Amara. She wrote that she had watched the reunion, had seen what Carolyn did, the step back. The withdrawal, the way she had reached for another child instead. She wrote, "No child of yours will grow up the way you grew up, baby girl. Not if I have anything to say about it." And I do. The last paragraph was short. "The land goes to you. All of it. Mr. Freeman has the paperwork. He is expecting your call. This is not a gift. This is a correction. This is what should have been protected for you from the beginning. Hold it. Keep it. Let Amara grow up knowing she comes from something real." She had signed it the way she signed everything, "With all my love, your big mama Loretta May Caldwell." I folded the letter back into thirds. I held it in both hands for a long moment. Then I picked up the business card and looked at the phone number. I did not call that night. I was in the middle of treatment and my hands were shaking slightly, not from emotion from the medication, a side effect Dr. Farhan had warned me about, and I did not trust my voice to be steady. I put the letter and the card back in the tin box. I put the tin box on my nightstand instead of back under the bed. I wanted it close. I called Mr. Freeman the following Monday morning. He answered on the second ring. Professional, unhurried, the voice of a man who had handled difficult family situations long enough to know how to be a steady presence on the phone. I told him my name. There was a brief pause, and then he said, "Miss Caldwell, I have been expecting your call. Your grandmother spoke of you often." We met the following Thursday at his office in Conroe, a small, clean building off Loop, 336 two-rooms, a waiting area, with framed prints of East Texas landscapes. He walked me through the will in its entirety. He explained the legal standing, the appraisal $1,320,000 as of 2023, the property taxes that had been kept current, the farmhouse structure, the timber on the back acreage. He asked if I had any questions. I had one. "Does the rest of the family know?" He said that the terms of the will would be read formally at a family gathering per Loretta May Caldwell's specific instruction. She had wanted it that way. She had wanted it said out loud in a room with everyone present. I thought about that on the drive back to Houston. Big Mama had been many things, gentle, certain, patient, but she had not been naive. She had known exactly what she was doing by requiring a formal reading. She had known that some truths need witnesses. I kept that knowledge to myself. The months that followed were the hardest and the clearest of my life, both things at once which I had not known was possible until I lived it. Treatment was brutal in the way treatment is brutal. There were weeks where getting Amara to daycare and back felt like the full extent of what I could manage. There were mornings I stood in the shower and let the water run cold because I didn't have the energy to reach for the handle. There were nights I lay in the dark and talked to God in the direct, undecorated way Big Mama had taught me. Not formal prayer, just conversation, just, "I need help getting through Thursday." But something else was happening at the same time, quietly, steadily, like a second current running beneath the difficult one. I was getting clearer about what I wanted, clearer about what I would no longer accept, clearer about the shape of the life I was building, not just surviving, building for myself and for Amara. In February, Dr. Farhan reviewed my latest imaging and used a word I had been waiting 4 months to hear: clear. He said it twice because I asked him to. I sat in that office chair and I let it land in my body fully the way good news deserves to land. Clear. Treatment complete. Follow-up schedule in place. He shook my hand. I drove to Shanice's apartment directly from the office, and she opened the door before I even knocked, and we stood in her doorway and held on to each other for a long time without saying anything. That same week, Big Mama passed. She went quietly in her bed in the farmhouse in Conroe in the middle of the night in January. The hospice nurse said she had not appeared to be in distress. She had simply, at some point between midnight and 4 in the morning, decided she was finished. I believe that. I believe she had been waiting for what I'm not sure. Maybe for the land paperwork to be in order. Maybe for me to be clear. Maybe both. I drove to Conroe the morning I got the call. I walked through the farmhouse alone before the rest of the family arrived. I stood in the kitchen at the old wooden table. I ran my hand along the surface worn smooth in the places where she had always rested her elbows. I could smell cornbread and cedar and something older than both. "I got it, Big Mama," I said out loud to the empty kitchen. "I know what to do." 3 weeks later, I was back at Houston Methodist as charge nurse. I had been promoted while on medical leave. My supervisor had put the paperwork through, quietly said she'd been planning it before I even got sick, and she was sorry it had taken this long. I stood at the nurse's station on my first morning back and looked out at the floor I now ran and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Solid, rooted, exactly where I was supposed to be. Mr. Freeman called that Friday to confirm the formal reading date. The third Saturday in March, his office in Conroe, all primary family members to be notified. I said that was fine. I did not call Carolyn to warn her. I did not call Brittany. I did not say a single word to anyone in the Caldwell family about what was in that tin box or what Mr. Freeman had told me in his office, off loop 336. I simply waited. And for the first time in 31 years, the waiting felt like power instead of helplessness. The drive to Conroe on that Saturday morning took just under an hour. I left Houston at 7:30. Amara still asleep at Miss Patricia's. The freeway quiet, in the way it only gets on weekend mornings before the city fully wakes up. I had my coffee in the cup holder and Big Mama's letter in my bag, not because I needed it. I had read it enough times to have it memorized, but because I wanted it close. The same reason I had moved the tin box from under the bed to the nightstand all those months ago. I arrived at Mr. Freeman's office at 8:45, 15 minutes early. Deliberate. His assistant, a soft-spoken woman named Miss Evelyn, who offered me water and said nothing unnecessary, showed me to the conference room. Long table, 8 chairs, a window overlooking a parking lot edged with pine trees. East Texas light coming through the blinds in long, pale strips. I chose the chair at the far end facing the door. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I waited. They arrived in the way families arrive to things they believe are already decided, with the loose confidence of people who have already divided the room in their heads. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Brenda came first, nodding at me, carefully taking seats near the middle. Then several cousins, the ones who had always occupied the outer ring of family gatherings, close enough to matter, but careful enough to stay neutral. Then Brittany. She came in with Marcus, though something about the way they moved together, a half step of distance eyes, not quite meeting, told me the rough patch Carolyn had mentioned on that phone call had not entirely smoothed itself out. Brittany was dressed well, the way she always dressed, a pale blue blazer hair freshly done. She scanned the room when she entered, and her eyes landed on me briefly before moving on. She sat down 2 seats from the middle, Marcus beside her. Carolyn came in last. She was wearing her church clothes, a deep burgundy dress, pearl earrings, the good handbag she kept for occasions she considered important. She walked in with the particular bearing of a woman who believes she is about to receive something she deserves. She greeted Vernon and Brenda. She touched Brittany's shoulder. Then her eyes found me at the far end of the table. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Something more like recalculation. She sat down. 12 people total around that table. The full inner circle of the Caldwell family assembled in a conference room off Loop 336 on a Saturday morning in March, under a sky so blue and clear it felt almost indifferent to what was about to happen inside. Mr. Freeman entered at 9 o'clock precisely. He was a composed man in his 60s, gray at the temples, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He set his leather binder on the table, greeted the room briefly, and sat down. He opened with the formalities, the legal language, the confirmation of Loretta May Caldwell's identity and sound mind at the time of drafting the date of the most recent update. His voice was even and unhurried. A man who had done this many times. A man who understood that the words he was about to read had been waiting years to be spoken. He began with the smaller bequests. Personal items, her mother's china to Aunt Brenda, the quilts to specific cousins, the Bible with the family tree written inside to Vernon, small amounts to several grandchildren for education, each name received with nods, with quiet murmurs of acknowledgement. Carolyn sat with her hands folded, expression composed. patient, waiting for the part that mattered. Brittany had her phone face down on the table. She was not quite still. Mr. Freeman turned a page. "Regarding the property," he said, and the room shifted almost imperceptibly, a collective tightening, a subtle leaning forward. The 47 acres of Caldwell family land located in Conroe, Montgomery County, Texas, appraised at $1,320,000 as of 2023. He paused. Not for drama, just the natural pause of a careful reader making sure he had the room's full attention. He had it. "Is bequeathed in its entirety to Jasmine Renee Caldwell." The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people absorbing information. The other kind. The kind that has weight. The kind that falls on a room when something has happened that cannot be undone. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Carolyn's expression did not collapse all at once. It changed in layers, the composed surface first, then something underneath it, then something underneath that. She looked at Mr. Freeman, then at me, then back at Mr. Freeman. "Read that again," she said. Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges. Mr. Freeman read it again. The words did not change. Brittany straightened in her chair. "That can't be right." Her voice was careful, measured the voice of someone trying not to sound as shaken as they were. "Mama always said the land would stay in the family. She always said, 'Miss Caldwell.'" Mr. Freeman's tone was not unkind, but it was final. "Mrs. Loretta May Caldwell updated this will on March the 9th, 2022. It is legally binding. It has been reviewed and is uncontested." Brittany looked at Carolyn. Carolyn looked at the table. Marcus said nothing. He had the expression of a man who was rapidly understanding that this situation had nothing to do with him and was deciding accordingly. Vernon cleared his throat. Aunt Brenda put her hand over his. Then Mr. Freeman said 4 more words. He said them quietly without particular emphasis, the way you say something that was always going to be said. "There is also a letter." The room, which had just begun to find its footing again, went still a second time. Carolyn looked up. Something in her eyes shifted the recalculation I had seen when she walked in sharper, now faster. She looked at me directly. I looked back at her. I did not look away. Mr. Freeman removed a sealed envelope from the back of his binder. He held it for a moment, then looked at the room over the top of his reading glasses. "Mrs. Caldwell specified that this letter be read aloud in full, in the presence of all parties." He paused. "That was her explicit instruction. I am obligated to honor it." The room was completely silent now. Outside the window, a car moved slowly through the parking lot. A pine tree shifted in the March breeze. The light through the blinds had not changed. Mr. Freeman opened the envelope. He unfolded 3 sheets of yellow legal paper. He began to read. Mr. Freeman read the way Big Mama had written carefully without rushing, giving every sentence the space it needed to land. He read the part about the land first, about Jasper Caldwell and the paper mill in Huntsville and 11 years of double shifts, and what 1967 cost a black man who wanted to own something permanent. He read it clearly, and I watched Vernon's jaw tighten because Vernon remembered great-grandfather Jasper had heard those stories. His whole life understood exactly what that land represented in a way that made what was coming harder to argue against. Then Mr. Freeman turned to the second page. He read Big Mama's words about the family, about what she had watched over 81 years, about the particular way certain kinds of preference move through a family without anyone naming them, quietly, continuously dressed up as something else. He read the word colorism aloud in that conference room. Nobody moved. I watched Carolyn's face when that word entered the air. She did not flinch outwardly, but something behind her eyes went very still, the stillness of a person who has just heard name the thing they spent decades not naming. The thing that had lived in this family like furniture, always present, never acknowledged, moved around rather than removed. Mr. Freeman continued. He read the part about me, about the kitchen and the Sunday calls and the reunions where I made myself small. He read Big Mama's words exactly as she had written them. What your mother could not give you was never about you. It was always about what she could not face in herself, and those words moved through the room like something physical. I heard Aunt Brenda make a small sound beside Vernon. One of the cousins shifted in her seat. Then he read the part about Amara, about the reunion, about what Carolyn had done the step back, the withdrawal, the way she had reached for another child. Big Mama had written it plainly with no cruelty but no softness either. Just the facts of what she had seen, recorded by a woman who had decided that some things needed to be on the record before she left. No child of Jasmine's will grow up the way Jasmine grew up, not if I have anything to say about it, and I do. I heard Brittany exhale sharply. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on Mr. Freeman. He read the final paragraph. He read the sign-off, "With all my love, your Big Mama, Loretta May Caldwell," and then he folded the letter carefully and set it on the table in front of him. The conference room was completely silent for what felt like a very long time. Then Carolyn spoke. She was not well. Her voice was quiet but firm, the voice she used when she had decided on a position and was going to hold it. In her final years, her mind, Mrs. Caldwell. Mr. Freeman's tone was not harsh, but it was immovable. This letter was written and notarized in March of 2022. At that time, Mrs. Loretta May Caldwell underwent a standard cognitive evaluation as part of the estate planning process. She was found to be in full mental capacity. That documentation is part of the record. Carolyn pressed her lips together. Brittany leaned forward. Jasmine. Her voice had shifted, not the practiced composure of when she had arrived, something rawer underneath it now. You had to have said something to her. You spent more time with her than any of us. You had to have influenced her somehow. I looked at my sister for a moment. Brittany, I said quietly. Big Mama wrote that letter 2.5 years before she passed. I didn't know what was in the tin box until 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what Mr. Freeman's name was until I opened that box. I paused. She made this decision on her own. That's exactly the kind of woman she was. Brittany opened her mouth, closed it. Marcus put his hand briefly on her arm and she pulled away from it slightly, that small motion, telling me more about the state of their marriage than anything Carolyn had said on the phone. Vernon cleared his throat. He looked older suddenly, the way people look when something they half knew is confirmed out loud. Jasmine, he said, I'm sorry. I want you to know what you've been carrying. He stopped, started again. I should have said something a long time ago. Vernon. Carolyn's voice was sharp. Carolyn. His voice for the first time I had ever heard was sharper. Mama just read her own letter to us from the grave. I think we are past the point of managing how things look. The room absorbed that. Aunt Brenda kept her hand over his. Carolyn turned to me then. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who cried easily, had never been, but something in her face had loosened. Not softened, loosened. Like a structure that has been holding a particular shape for a very long time and has finally, under enough pressure, begun to give. I did the best I could, she said. I want you to know that. I looked at my mother. I thought about the parking lot at PVAMU, the graduation sash still around my neck, at a Tex-Mex restaurant, while she talked about Marcus Moore. Amara's arms reaching upward, 2 minutes and 17 seconds. I thought about the kettle, the tea, my steady hands. I know you did, Mama, I said. And I meant it not as absolution, not as an erasure of everything that had happened, but as a simple, true statement. She had done the best she was capable of doing. The problem was that her best had never included looking at me fully, and I had spent 31 years trying to make myself small enough that the gap between her best and what I needed would somehow stop mattering. It had always mattered. But I need you to understand something. I kept my voice even. When I told you I was sick, you hung up the phone. You didn't call back for 23 days. And when you did call back, it was because you heard the word will. I paused. I know what that means, and I can't keep acting like I don't. Carolyn looked at the table. If you want a relationship with Amara, I continued, I need you to show up for Amara, not for what she might inherit someday, not because it looks right at Second Baptist. For her, consistently, the way Big Mama showed up for me. I let that sit for a moment. That's the only thing I'm asking, but I am asking it clearly. Nobody spoke. I pushed my chair back from the table. I picked up my bag. I looked around the room once at Vernon, who gave me a small nod, at the cousins who were very still, at Brittany, who was looking at the table with an expression I did not have a name for, at Mr. Freeman, who gave me the brief professional nod of a man who had just done exactly what his client had asked him to do. Then I looked at Carolyn one last time. She was looking at me, really looking the way she almost never had. I don't know what she saw. I know what I felt standing there in that conference room in Conroe with Big Mama's letter on the table and 47 acres outside the county recorder's office with my name on them. I felt like myself, completely, finally, without apology. I love you, Mama, I said, but I'm done shrinking. I walked to the door. I opened it. The March air outside Mr. Freeman's office was cool and bright, the pine trees throwing long shadows across the parking lot. I stood on the front step for a moment and I breathed it in, that particular East Texas air that smelled like pine and red clay, and something older underneath both. For the first time in my life, I walked out of a room full of Caldwells and felt nothing but peace, not triumph, not anger, not the exhausted relief of someone who has finally been believed after years of not being believed. Just peace, clean and solid and entirely my own. It is June now. The farmhouse in Conroe still smells like cornbread and cedar. I don't know how Big Mama has been gone 5 months, but it does. Some smells get into the walls of a place and stay there long after the person who made them is gone. I think that's intentional. I think Big Mama would approve. I drive up on weekends when I can. Sometimes just Amara and me. Sometimes Shanice comes, and we sit on the back porch with sweet tea and watch Amara run across the yard the way children run when they have real land under their feet, with the particular freedom of a child who understands in some wordless way that this space belongs to her. I have not sold the land. I will not sell the land. I hired a property manager to help with the timber acreage while I figure out the longer-term plan. I have been talking to an architect in Conroe about restoring the farmhouse properly, not renovating it into something unrecognizable, but restoring it, keeping the bones, keeping the wooden table in the kitchen, keeping the cabinet above the refrigerator where Big Mama kept the things that mattered most. Amara has already claimed the back porch as her reading spot. She drags a cushion out there and sits with her books and her sippy cup like she's been doing it her whole life. She is 4 years old and she already looks at home in a way I spent 31 years searching for. That is everything. That is the whole point. Carolyn called me 6 weeks after the reading. Not about the land, not about the will. She called on a Tuesday evening and she asked if she could come see Amara on Saturday. I said yes. She came. She brought a bag of books and a stuffed elephant, and she sat on my living room floor with my daughter for 2 hours and read to her and let Amara put barrettes in her hair and did not once check her phone. When it was time to go, Amara hugged her around the neck and said, "Bye-bye, Grandma." And Carolyn held on for a moment longer than necessary. At the door, she looked at me. She started to say something, stopped, started again. "I'm going to do better," she said finally. Simple. No performance around it. I nodded. "I know you're going to try, Mama." That is where we are. Not reconciled in the way movies show reconciliation. Tearful, complete, all accounts settled. Life does not move that cleanly. What we have is something more honest than that. A beginning. Tentative and real. She shows up for Amara. She calls before she comes. She does not make promises she cannot keep, and I do not ask her for more than she is currently able to give. It is not the mother-daughter relationship I used to dream about when I was 12 years old hiding my school photo in a kitchen drawer, but it is real. And real, I have learned, is worth more than perfect every single time. Brittany and I have not spoken since the reading. I do not know what she is working through. I imagine it is complicated having the structure of your family's approval examined that plainly in a conference room in front of everyone by someone who is no longer alive to argue with. I imagine it asks questions of her that she is not yet ready to answer. I hope eventually she finds her way to them, not for my sake, for hers. What I know is that I spent 31 years measuring myself against my sister, against the way our family received her versus the way they received me, against the space she occupied versus the space I was allowed. That measuring cost me something I cannot fully calculate, years of making myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, less present. Years of filing things away in a part of myself that was getting very full. I am done measuring. We are two different women who came from the same house and had completely different childhoods under the same roof. What she does with her life is hers. What I do with mine is mine. That boundary is not angry. It is simply clear. I went back to Second Baptist the first Sunday in May. I had not been in years, not since I left for Prairie View. Really, not with any consistency. I walked in wearing a yellow dress, not the same yellow dress from my second-grade photo, a new one, but yellow on purpose. I sat in the fourth pew, the one with the good light coming through the stained glass in the morning, and I listened to the choir, and I thought about Big Mama sitting in the same building for decades, quiet and certain and watching everything. After the service, the pastor, a younger man than I remembered the congregation had changed with the years, shook my hand in the receiving line and asked if I was new. I told him my name. I told him who my grandmother was. His face changed the way faces change when you mention someone who left a mark. Loretta May Caldwell, he said. That woman prayed for this community for 50 years. He held my hand a moment longer. You look like her, you know. I walked to my car in the May Houston sunshine, and I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. I look like her. I have her complexion, her wide nose, her deep-set eyes, the features that were described my whole childhood with words like strong and interesting instead of beautiful, the features that marked me in certain family rooms and certain church hallways as the one who was not quite right. The one who did not reflect back what my mother had decided to value. Big Mama's features. I thought about her hands on the side of my face in that kitchen, warm and rough and steady. I thought about what she had seen when she looked at me. Not a consolation. Not the other one. Not interesting or strong as a substitute for beautiful. Just Jasmine. Exactly right. Exactly enough. I started the car. I drove to Conroe to check on the farmhouse. The property manager had sent photos of some repairs that needed attention on the east side of the roof, and I wanted to see them in person. I had learned from Big Mama that you show up for what you own. You do not manage it from a distance. You put your hands on it. Amara was in the back seat already asleep before we hit the freeway the stuffed elephant Carolyn had brought tucked under her arm. I drove with the windows down and the radio low. 47 acres. My name on the deed, my daughter in the back seat, the road north out of Houston opening up ahead of me into the particular green of East Texas in early summer, big sky pine trees, red clay shoulders on either side of the highway. Big Mama used to say that roots hold you up, not hold you down, hold you up. There is a difference between those two things that takes a long time to understand. I understand it now. I built nothing overnight. I did not wake up one day healed and whole and finished. Healing does not work that way, and I will not pretend it does. What I did was smaller and harder and more real than that. I showed up for my own life one Tuesday at a time, one phone call at a time, one steady hand at a time. I stopped waiting to be chosen by people who had already shown me what they would choose. I chose myself instead, and I kept the land. Not for what it is worth on an appraiser's report, though $1,320,000 is not nothing for a woman who once took the bus for 3 months because she had no one to lend her money for a car repair. I kept it because Jasper Caldwell worked 11 years of double shifts so that something in this family would be permanent. Because Big Mama spent 81 years tending something that deserved to be tended. Because Amara deserves to grow up knowing she comes from something that was fought for and held on to and passed down with intention. Because some corrections take generations to make, and this one has my name on it. Big Mama used to say roots hold you up. They don't hold you down. You are allowed to know your worth without waiting for the people who should have shown it to you first. You are allowed to keep what is yours. You are allowed to take up space, build your roots, protect them, and never apologize for knowing exactly who you are. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with family? How did it change your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.